Okay, so now here in the abdominal area, we're looking for arteries and veins. Let's start with the veins. Immediately I see the inferior vena cava, and that's the same one I saw, up above. It goes all the way to the heart. And the branches from it are, of course, the renal vein, which is coming from the kidney here. And I also see here the testicular vein. Remember, this was a male. This vein runs all the way down and meets the vas deferens. Above the renal vein, I see the suprarenal vein, and it's crossing the little bean-shaped adrenal gland that we saw earlier. So right here, I want to be able to label 4 veins: suprarenal, renal, testicular, and the inferior vena cava. Now, in terms of arteries, when I did this testicular vein, I noticed that there was an artery here coming from the aorta. Let's just get the aorta here where we can see it. The abdominal aorta is running on the left side of the inferior vena cava, and the little pink artery that's here comes along and comes right out of the aorta. Looks like right about here. Okay, so the abdominal aorta is running here. And when I come back up here, I see the renal artery, which is, of course, coming from that aorta. So in terms of arteries right here, I just need to do the renal, the abdominal aorta, and the testicular. Now, as we move further down from this, we come to a point where the inferior vena cava begins to dive deep. The abdominal aorta stays superficial here. And just before it branches, we see 2 blood vessels coming across the muscles in the back of the cat, and these are called the lumbars. In a human, there would be many of these regularly spaced. In the cat, we just typically see this one. So this is going to be a lumbar artery, and the blue one alongside it is the lumbar vein. Finally, the abdominal aorta divides into its iliac branches. These are the ones going into the lower limb and the hip. And the first 2 larger branches are external iliacs. The abdominal aorta typically moves a little bit farther, and then it branches into 2 smaller internal iliacs. Okay. So those are all the paired branches. There's a right and left of every one of these we've talked about. There are a set of 3 arteries that run out into these digestive organs. And if we stay down here, the first one we see here is the inferior mesenteric. We see it coming off the lower part of the abdominal aorta, and I recognize it because it's coming up and feeding the descending colon. And all these little tiny branches you see here were all blood flow from this tube that's coming up alongside the descending colon. If we come up above here, above the adrenal gland, we see 2 arteries here. This one, the more inferior one, is leading straight into the small intestine, and that's called the superior mesenteric. And if I fan out these, you can see all the little arteries in here were all being fed by this superior mesenteric artery. This other major artery coming from the abdominal aorta here is the celiac trunk. A trunk artery always has branches, and we won't find the branches, but if we've studied the celiac trunk, we know its 3 branches are splenic, gastric, and hepatic: liver, stomach, and spleen. And we'll see that this is pointed straight at the spleen, the stomach, and the liver. So we can see from the direction it's pointing what it is. So all 3 of these are all pointing at the major places that they carry blood to. Finally, the veins here. We know that the venous drainage from all of these organs is different than everywhere else. Instead of this blood going back into the inferior vena cava, all of this blood is returning to, or is moving to, the liver. And maybe you remember from the earlier lecture, the liver processes all of this nutritious blood before it can enter general circulation. And so the veins here are different. And we've had the company that preserved the cats and prepared the cats for us color all of the veins that lead to the liver with a yellow dye instead of a blue dye. And so every yellow vein you see here is leading to the liver, not back to the heart. So these would be mesenteric veins. But what we'll do is we'll come here, and when we look here, all of these mesenteric veins are leading into this yellow vein that you see here, which is going to be called the superior mesenteric vein. Right next to it, you see the superior mesenteric artery that was carrying all the blood into this small intestine. The superior mesenteric vein joins this splenic vein, and you can see the spleen over here. This is coming from the spleen. And once the two join, the tube from here, from this juncture point, into the liver, and maybe you can't quite see it very well, but this then is called the portal vein. And from here into the center of the liver, and then spreading its blood throughout the liver to be processed. So you see 3 right here, okay? And then the fourth one, we would just again identify over here. If we come to the descending colon again, we see a yellow vein right here following the artery, and this is draining all the blood from here. This one would be called the inferior mesenteric vein. And if you follow it far enough, you would see it enter into the superior mesenteric vein. I don't know if we can quite see that, but not quite. But the inferior mesenteric flows into the superior joins with splenic, and all of this blood then finally enters the liver.